One of the things I recommend doing when you are throwing bowls is looking at a lot of bowls. Same thing with cylinders. When you're throwing cylinders, make sure you're looking at a lot of these things. But looking carefully at bowls around your house, around the studio, even online, helps you recognize the sorts of forms that can be made, and then you might start having things to make yourself. If you've only ever looked at one or two types of bowls, those are the kinds of bowls you're going to make, and they may be fine, but there are so many different options around the room, around the world, that you can really have some fun with these sorts of bowl forms. Now I've got some bowls here that are fairly simple. This piece here has a round interior, a round exterior, some glaze on the inside. It was wood fired, and so that's why the outside is kind of rough, a little bit of shine there. That's also why you see these marks on the corner. But a fairly simple bowl form like this is lightened up or is enlivened a little bit by these throwing lines, and this person has left the throwing lines visible on the bowl. Here's another wood-fired bowl, very similar kind of color scheme. And again, glaze on the inside, wood fire effect on the outside, green interior glaze. But here the throwing lines are much less prominent. One thing this person has done, though, is use faceting. They've used a loop tool or a ribbon tool to cut these lines up the side of the pot. They left the bowl a little bit thick when they threw it, and that's what enabled them to cut away from the surface, leaving a kind of interesting exterior. And then you see here that the foot on the inside is visible. They've cut away some of the extra clay here, but on the exterior it's difficult to see where that foot ends, as opposed to the one we just looked at. We've also got bowls here where the person has decorated the edge of the bowl, given it a wiggly rim. I've got a couple of those sorts of forms here. Fairly simple bottom on this one, and you can see the marks from where a knife was used to make that rim a little bit wiggly. This one, besides having that gently wiggling rim and some decoration, also has a foot that's been cut away more than just the foot ring was thrown, and then after it was thrown, pieces of that foot ring were cut away as a decorative choice. Some of these bowls are more interesting because of their glaze, but you can still take a look at the sorts of shape you like. All of these forms are fairly simple in their surface before decoration, but the artist has chosen to make very different profiles. So this one's much deeper, this one's much wider, this one's kind of halfway in between with a fairly tall foot. Here's another low, wide one, and again you see the glaze decoration gets fairly complex. Going farther in the direction of low and wide, you have something like this, where it's almost becoming sort of a platter. Still has a round interior, a round exterior with that foot ring, and then this rim has been bent out when throwing it. This person's kept the pot very tall, or the bowl very tall. Again, we have a round interior, a fairly high foot ring, and then they've used some sort of a knife or a rib to press the edges of this very thin, delicate bowl in to give that kind of decorative sort of shape. Now you can't imagine banging this one around in the dishwasher like you do with some of these other ones. It's more delicate, more for decorative or careful kinds of meals. I think of a dessert in here. Notice that a very narrow rim on this one still keeps it fairly steady. If I knock on the side of it, it's not going anywhere. But you can go too far in that direction. I always show this piece as an example. It's a fairly wide, heavy bowl with this teeny tiny rim. And the problem here is it tends to knock over, it tends to fall over. And so you've got to be careful when you're deciding on the size of the rim to work on both aesthetics and function. I've got some pieces here that have some cutouts. This one here has been cut out so chopsticks can sit there. Here the person is just pressed on the edge of the rim for the chopsticks, and notice that these very deep throwing lines show up and allow the glaze to gather in there. You also see the use of a stamp, Maker's Mark stamp here is done a little bit differently, and we've got that deep cutout in the foot ring. This piece is almost not a bowl anymore because of the way that rim comes in, but it's sort of an interesting piece because you can see the way they've used shells and stamps to decorate the exterior. And you can even see those on the inside. You can see the marks of the fingers running up the side of the bowl while it was fairly wet. Here's another piece, much on a smaller scale, that comes in quite a bit. You see the round bottom, trimmed foot, and then these cutouts were done while the pot was on the wheel. After the cuts were made with a wooden knife, the bowl was pressed out a little bit more to kind of stretch those cuts, and then during the glazing, some glaze was laid in there and wiped away from the surface. One of the things that people are really tempted to do is leave a swirl in the bottom, let their finger or their rib make a decorative swirl in the bottom, which is a neat look, but this bowl is actually one that I use as an example of why you might want to avoid doing that. Here, the glaze has started to chip right on that edge because it's been used and used and used over the years, probably 12-year-old bowl here that gets used fairly regularly, but in getting stacked in the kitchen, things rub up against that edge, or spoons and stuff like that, washing the dishes, and that glaze can start to chip and wear away over time. The other thing that's kind of interesting going on this one is while it was still wet, the person pushed on the sides, on the corners here, to make this bowl a little bit more squared off than round. Here we've got a very tall bowl with some slip-trailed decoration, and you see much more of an angle happening on the inside. The bottom is round, but then there's a sort of corner where that wall begins. This bowl, again, like this one here, really tells you what you're going to use it for. It doesn't feel like a cereal bowl because it's so tall, because it's so deep. It has a different sort of feel, and this piece ends up being a little bit more decorative. I've also got some interesting decoration going on some of these that's worth mentioning. This bowl here has some stencil or some transfers that were done, some glazed transfers that were made by this particular artist. It says Gilliatt is the name here, and so these were attached on. There's also glaze was resisted in a line around here. We've got several that have slip decoration with color and with lines, probably slip-trailed or printed on this piece. And this one is Lollipop Pottery from Ohio. So real exciting on the outside is in the decoration, even though the bowl itself is relatively simple. This is simply two kinds of glaze put together into one piece. Latex resist was used where these little circles are, and then the glaze was dipped in the yellow, or the bowl was dipped in the yellow glaze, then the latex resist was peeled off, and the glaze was applied into these places here. A different kind of resist was used here. This is just pieces of tape. Vinyl can be used as well. They were stuck on. The whole piece was colored with the yellow and red underglaze, and then the tape was removed, and the whole piece was glazed with just a light matte glaze over the top. These pieces have slip trailing on them, on the inside and the outside, with decorative glazes on the inside of that slip trail. And as I mentioned here, this one has slip trailing that's got a little bit more thickness to the slip, and then a glaze over the top of that one as well.